The ballroom of Sherborne House blazed on the second Thursday of March, and Miss Cecily Barrow stood at its edge, the way a candle stands near a window, present and necessary to no one, and in quiet danger of being put out by the draught. She had dressed with care. There was not much to dress. The gown was white muslin, 3 seasons old, let out at the sleeves where her wrists had grown prominent since she had stopped eating a full dinner. And the only adornment she permitted herself was the small pressed violet tucked inside her left glove, fitted just below the knuckle where her mother had placed it 6 years ago and told her it was for courage. Cecily had needed courage with some regularity since then. Lady Harriet Vane swept past without looking at her. This was usual. Lady Harriet employed Cecily as a companion, the way some women employ a useful piece of furniture. Gratefully, invisibly, and with the mild resentment that capable objects tend to inspire. Cecily was 24 years old and owned nothing that she had not arrived with: a small trunk, a few books, the violet in the glove. And she owed her place in this household entirely to the goodwill of a cousin who had never quite explicitly offered it. The room was magnificent. Cecily catalogued it from force of habit, the way one catalogues a storm. The chandeliers were lit with more candles than a country church used in a fortnight. The women moved through the light in silks the color of confectionery. The men stood in their dark coats like chess pieces waiting to be played. And near the head of the room, alone in the way that only men of extreme consequence can be alone in a crowd, stood Edmund Hartwell, Duke of Ashmore. He was not looking at her. No one was looking at her. Then he was. It lasted 3 seconds, perhaps 4. He did not look away first, and Cecily felt the held gaze like a hand laid against the back of her neck, not unpleasant, and entirely without explanation. She looked down at her glove. When she looked up, he had turned to accept a glass from a footman and was speaking in a low voice to a man she did not recognize, his profile unreadable and still as the carved stonework above the mantel. Lady Constance Hartwell, the Duchess of Ashmore, had noticed. The Duchess was a handsome woman of 60 who wore her certainty like a second set of diamonds. She said something to the woman beside her, a Mrs. Covell, without shifting her gaze from Cecily. The words reached Cecily in pieces, carried by the particular acoustic quality of marble floors. "She is only Miss Barrow, Lady Vane's companion. Pay her no mind." Mrs. Covell paid her no mind. Cecily had learned, in the 18 months since her father's death and her subsequent removal from her childhood home in Shropshire, to the damp and particular generosity of the Vane household in London, that a woman with no fortune and no position could become invisible by careful management, or she could resist the invisibility and suffer the consequences. She had tried both. The invisibility was less painful. She fixed her eyes on the far windows, settled her hands at her sides, and allowed herself to be a companion, which was another word for furniture, which was another word for safe. She did not, at this particular moment, feel safe. Lord Renfrew was in the room. She had seen him arrive 20 minutes ago. She had tracked him across the floor with the specific vigilance one reserves for creditors and creditors' agents and men who believe that the debts of dead fathers are best settled through the living daughters they leave behind. He had not approached her yet. His approach was not a question of whether, but of when, and Cecily understood that when arrived under the cover of a crowded supper room or a momentarily vacated alcove, where whatever he said to her could not be heard clearly enough to be disputed. She pressed her left hand against her skirt, felt the small resistance of the violet beneath the glove, and reminded herself that she had managed worse. She was not entirely certain she had managed worse. The reminder had a stubborn comfort to it that she would not abandon. Across the room, the Duke of Ashmore had turned back toward the center of the floor. Cecily did not watch him. She was very careful not to watch him, which was how she knew, precisely, without looking, when he moved. Her father, Mr. Thomas Barrow, had been a man of modest but sufficient income, considerable warmth, and very poor judgment in the matter of investments. He had died 14 months ago of a fever that came on in November and did not leave by Christmas. And in dying, he had left behind a library, a portrait of his late wife, 3 unpaid notes of hand, and Cecily. The library had been sold at auction. The portrait had been sold privately to a man in Holborn who had wanted a frame. The notes remained. Cecily remained. She had come to London because there was nowhere else in England that owed her a room. Lord Renfrew held the largest of the 3 notes. He had mentioned this to Cecily twice since her arrival, each time in tones of such elaborate sympathy that she had found it necessary to look at a fixed point on the wall until the sympathy finished. He was a man of 50, with the pink, confident face of someone whose certainties had never been seriously tested. He had a house in Surrey. He had mentioned the house in Surrey as well. The evening advanced in the particular way London evenings advance, when a woman has nothing to do but observe them. The first set of dances formed and completed. The supper room opened. Lady Harriet accepted 3 compliments and redirected 2 of them, and forgot about Cecily entirely, which was the desired outcome, and also not. Cecily circulated at the room's periphery. This was her function, to be near enough to Lady Harriet to be produced if required, and far enough removed to be invisible if not. She knew which corners were pleasant, and which were cold. She knew that the second alcove past the supper-room door was screened by a long arrangement of forced roses, and that one could stand there without being noticed for 10 minutes or more. She knew that if one pressed oneself against the wall near the window, one became briefly, mercifully, part of the architecture. A footman carrying a laden tray moved too close to her on his circuit of the room. The edge of the tray caught the air near her shoulder, and she shifted to avoid it. And the Duke of Ashmore, who had come to stand 6 feet away in the direction she had not been watching, reached out one hand and steadied the footman's tray before either of them could speak. He did not look at Cecily. He did not acknowledge that he had moved to be within 6 feet of her. He moved on, rejoining the group near the head of the room, and the footman said something grateful to his retreating back. Cecily looked at her glove. She had not imagined it. The footman had been genuinely unsteady. The Duke had simply been close enough to act, which might have meant nothing at all. She told herself it meant nothing at all. It was in passing the East Gallery that she heard the sound. A child, small, perhaps 3 years old, dressed in white with a blue sash and the expression of a person who has entirely lost the thread of the evening, stood near the base of a large Roman bust and was making the quiet, dignified attempt not to cry that small children make when they have been crying for some time and believe no one is coming. Cecily looked down the gallery. No nurse, no mother, no other soul. She looked back at the ballroom. Lady Harriet was gesturing at someone with her fan. Cecily went to the child. She did not think about the state of her gown or the marble floor's effect upon it. She simply knelt, because that was what the situation required. And she said very quietly, "Hello, are you lost?" The child regarded her with enormous dark eyes and said nothing. Cecily settled herself more firmly on the floor. "I am very nearly lost too," she said. "I find it helps to sing something, if you do not mind the suggestion." She sang the fragment of a song her mother had taught her. It had no particular distinction except that it was slow and low and had the quality of making the world feel a size smaller and more governable than it had appeared a moment before. The child stopped trying not to cry. After a moment, the child sat down on the floor beside Cecily, with the decisive gravity of a person who has found their footing. The child's hand found Cecily's, and Cecily gave it. And the two of them sat on the marble with the particular communion of people who have dispensed with ceremony. Cecily sang the verse through once and then again. Softer. Aware of the cold coming up through the floor, and of her gown's hem spreading across the marble, and of none of these things mattering very much. The gallery was quiet, save for her voice and the distant orchestral murmur from the ballroom. She was entirely unconcerned with being seen. She had forgotten the ballroom existed. Cecily became aware of a presence at the gallery's threshold. She did not look up immediately. When she did, the threshold was empty. The air near the doorway had the quality of recently occupied attention, a warmth, a held stillness, and at the base of the doorframe there was a faint impression in the pile of the carpet where a large man's boot had rested for some time and then withdrawn. Someone had stood there and watched, and had not made themselves known, and had gone. If you have ever watched a woman who did not know she was being watched, you understand something the rest of that room did not. Stay with this. There is more to see. The child's nurse was found 3 doors down, breathless and ashen. The child went with her without protest, looking back once at Cecily from the corridor, with the expression of someone who has made a friend of some consequence. Cecily returned to the ballroom. She had been gone 11 minutes. No one appeared to have noticed. The Duke of Ashmore had noticed. He was standing near the East Gallery's entrance when Cecily emerged from it. The child's hand transferred to the nurse, her plain gown acquiring a slight marble dust line at the knee that would not come out. He observed both of these facts without expression. His hand had moved, at some point during the singing, to the breast pocket of his coat, where it had rested against the slight weight there, and had not moved for the full duration. The miniature lived in that pocket, small as a man's thumb, in a worn gold frame. He had carried it for 2 years. He had been to 9 balls this season, and had not, at any of them, taken his hand from his side as he had just done, pressed against the glass of it, without intending to. He said nothing. He did not approach. The Duchess appeared at his elbow with the precision of a woman who has been watching the East Gallery for some time. "Philippa Rowe is waiting for you at the head of the room," she said. "I am aware," he said. "Edmund." "I heard you, Mother." He turned toward the head of the room. Cecily, 20 feet away, adjusted her glove and turned toward the supper room. Neither of them looked back. He had stood at that doorway for 11 minutes, and Cecily's song was still somewhere in the room's air, and the Duke of Ashmore's hand did not return to his side for some considerable time after he left the doorway. It was near the top of the supper room door that the Duke found reason to be standing close to Cecily again. He paused beside her, apparently examining the arrangement of the room, and said in a low, even voice, "The Reynolds in the East Passage. Would you say it is well hung?" Cecily looked at him. "I beg your pardon?" "The portrait. It has always seemed too high to me. I have been meaning to have it moved for 2 seasons, and have never managed to decide where." She looked at the portrait in question, visible through the passage, a serious young man in an earlier fashion. "The light is wrong for it where it is," she said carefully. "It wants a north-facing wall. The south light flattens it." He regarded her with an attention she could not interpret. "You know something of paintings?" "My father had a small collection. Before." She did not finish the sentence. He did not press her to. "Miss Barrow," he said, and the name in his mouth had a careful quality, as if he had been keeping it there for some time and was now permitting it a small, measured release. "Will you take a turn about the room?" She was very much aware of the Duchess watching from the head of the floor. She was aware of Miss Rowe beside the Duchess, composed and expectant and beautiful in pale yellow silk. "I think that might not be advisable, Your Grace," she said. His mouth shifted very slightly at one corner. "No," he said. "It would not be." He looked at the portrait a moment longer. "You are right about the light." He moved on. She stood where she was and breathed carefully and pressed the violet once with her thumb. It was some 20 minutes later, near the start of the second set of dances, that Lady Harriet performed her correction. A young man named Mr. Seton, who had been looking about the room with the optimistic confusion of his first full season, moved toward Cecily with the evident intention of requesting the next set. Lady Harriet materialized between them before he could speak. "She is not here to dance," Lady Harriet said, loudly enough for the 4 nearest couples to hear. "She is the companion. You want Miss Rowe, I believe, whose card is not yet full." Mr. Seton looked mortified. Cecily looked at the candles. Lady Harriet smiled in the Duchess's direction and moved away, satisfied with the restoration of proper order. The Duchess nodded. Miss Rowe glanced across the room at Cecily, and there was something in her expression that was not unkind, and Cecily, who had been composing herself in public since the age of 16, kept her own face quite empty and turned toward the south windows. Lord Renfrew found her there at 10:30. He planted himself in her path with the ease of a man accustomed to occupying other people's space. He placed his hand on the wall beside her in a gesture that was not technically threatening and was nothing else. "Miss Barrow," he said, "we have avoided each other long enough." "I have not been avoiding you," she said. Her voice held. "Your father's note falls due at the end of this quarter." He smiled. The smile was the worst part of him. Lady Vane's charity has been generous. One does wonder how long it will extend. She said nothing. "I have a modest house in Surrey," he said. "Comfortable. You would manage it well." "I have always thought so." He lowered his arm, confident she would not walk away. He was correct. There was nowhere to walk to that was not also his. "Give me your answer before the supper-room bell. If you choose otherwise, I will speak to Lady Harriet this evening. About the note, about the quarter, about the particular difficulty she has taken on in keeping you." He stepped back. He was entirely confident she would comply. He moved away with the ease of a man who has issued an instruction and expects to find it followed when he returns. And Cecily watched him go and felt the particular stillness that arrives when a door closes and there is no key. The supper-room bell was perhaps 6 minutes away. Lady Harriet was directly across the room, laughing at something the Duchess had just said. The Duchess was watching Cecily over Lady Harriet's shoulder with the patient attention of a woman who has arranged several things this evening and is waiting to see them resolve. A footman moved past with a tray. The edge of the tray caught the trailing edge of Cecily's sleeve. In the half-second of imbalance, she made a decision that was not entirely rational, and was the most rational decision she had made all evening. She let her knees soften. She had never fainted in her life. She discovered she was better at its performance than she would have predicted. The key, she understood in the moment of performing it, was not to stiffen against the fall, but to permit the body to move the way bodies actually move when they leave themselves. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in a slow and entirely convincing subsidence, the way water finds its level. Someone caught her. 2 hands, certain and without hesitation, arrived at her shoulders and her waist before she reached the floor. She felt the warmth of them through the muslin of her gown. She felt herself lifted, not hauled, but lifted, with the quiet economy of effort that belongs to a man accustomed to the weight of things that matter. She kept her eyes closed. She heard the room shift around her. Exclamations, a woman's sharp intake of breath. Lord Renfrew saying something she could not quite make out. Lady Harriet's voice rising with the particular pitch of public inconvenience rather than concern. She heard, beneath all of this, a low voice, close and deliberate, addressed not to the room but to her, as if the room were not there. "Excuse us," said the Duke of Ashmore. He carried her out. The antechamber was small and cool. It smelled of beeswax and old upholstery. Cecily knew this because she was breathing carefully, the way one breathes when one is supposed to have stopped, and the scent of the room registered with great precision while everything else held still. He had not set her down. She became aware of this gradually. She was not on the floor. She was not on a settee. She was held, with one arm around her shoulders and another beneath her knees, in the particular stillness of a man who has carried something somewhere and found that he did not wish to put it down. The door to the ballroom was closed. The music was muffled. Someone had thought to light a single lamp. "You may open your eyes now, Miss Barrow," said the Duke. She did not. A pause. Not uncomfortable, not impatient. "Very well," he said. "We will wait." He moved toward a chair, and she felt the shift in balance as he sat, settling her carefully with a deliberateness that was not romantic, and was not cold, and was something she did not have immediate vocabulary for. She considered this. He rested one arm across her, not holding her down, but simply present. His breathing was slow. He was entirely unalarmed. She said, keeping her eyes shut, "You must put me down." "Must I?" "It is not appropriate." "And fainting at balls is appropriate." She said nothing. The lamp burned. Somewhere beneath the door, the orchestra shifted to a slower measure. "Miss Barrow," he said. His voice had dropped half a register. "I have been watching you all evening. I know what a woman looks like when she has stopped breathing, and I know what she looks like when she is breathing very carefully so as not to be detected. You are doing the second one." A pause. "You are also very good at it. I shall give you that." She opened her eyes. He was very close. His face held the polished neutrality of a man who has kept his own counsel for a long time, and beneath it, there was something she had not expected. Not triumph, not amusement, but something quieter and considerably older than either. "There you are," he said. She said, with as much composure as the situation allowed, "Your Grace." "Miss Barrow." "I am recovered. I ought to return to Lady Harriet." "To what?" He said it without force. "To Lord Renfrew? To the south window where he had you cornered?" He waited. "To Lady Harriet's side, where you may stand invisible for the remainder of the evening, and he may press you again during the supper set?" She said nothing. His arm did not move. "I will return you to that room," he said, "when you tell me what drove you from it. Take your time." She sat up. He permitted it, removing his arm, and his hand, which had rested across her, transferred itself to her wrist, not grasping but simply present, and she did not remove it. She pressed the fingers of her other hand against the place in her glove where the violet lived. Outside, a carriage passed. He spoke after a while, not quite to her. He spoke to the room, or to the kind of air that gathers around the things one has not said for too long. "My wife died in this same season," he said. 2 years ago. I was in Parliament when the message came, and the man on horseback rode 11 miles, and I did not arrive in time." He was very still. "She was 3 days in the lying-in. She would not let them send for me early because she said she knew how I disliked leaving matters unfinished in the Lords, and she was certain it would resolve itself. A pause. She was wrong about the lying in. She was right about everything else she ever said. He looked at the lamp. The child died 3 hours after she did. We had agreed on James. He was quiet for a moment. I have sat with that particular arithmetic for 2 years, and I have not yet resolved it. He looked at her then, and his expression was the one she had not had vocabulary for. She would have liked your singing, he said. She had no patience for performances she did not believe in. She had very little patience for women who made themselves small to spare other people discomfort. She had a great deal of patience for what was real. He stopped speaking. Cecily opened her eyes fully and found him already watching her, as if he had known the precise moment of it and had been patient enough to wait. There we are, he said very quietly. She told him about Renfrew then. The debt, the quarter, the house in Surrey, the ultimatum before the supper-room bell. She did not soften the account or present it with apology. She told it plainly, in the same register she used when she was reading aloud to Lady Harriet or explaining an account to the housekeeper. And it struck her only afterward that she had not spoken plainly about her situation to anyone in 14 months. The telling had a physical quality. It felt like setting down something she had been carrying at an awkward angle for a very long time. He listened without interruption. His thumb moved once across the inside of her wrist in the way a person's hand does when they are thinking about something other than comfort. And the gesture arrives anyway. I know what Renfrew intended, he said when she had finished. My mother put it to me earlier this evening as a tidy resolution to a domestic inconvenience. I did not find it tidy. He would have spoken to Lady Harriet. He would have. He will not now. His hand remained on her wrist. What do you want, Miss Barrow? Not what is available to you. What do you want? No one had asked her that in 2 years. The question arrived with a physical weight she had not anticipated, somewhere beneath her collarbone, in the place she had been careful not to feel anything for some time. To go home, she said. Only I have no home. He looked at her for a long moment. The door opened. A footman, young and clearly dispatched under firm instruction, stood in the doorway. Your Grace. Her Grace the Duchess sends word that the companion is to be returned to Lady Vane's side at once. Her Grace says the companion is not a guest and ought not to be occupying your Grace's time. The Duke said, Thank you. That will be all. The footman withdrew. The Duke rose. Cecily rose with him, her hand still loosely in his. He looked at it. She looked at it. He did not release it. Come, he said. He did not return her to Lady Vane's side. He returned to the ballroom with Cecily Barrow on his arm, and he walked at the measured, unhurried pace of a man who made a decision some hours ago and is only now informing the room of it. The crowd parted. They did this for dukes as a matter of course, and they did it now with the additional impetus of something in his expression that Cecily could not see from her vantage point beside him, but that she felt in the sudden, absolute silence that spread from their entrance like a stone dropped in still water. Lady Harriet Vane went pale. Lord Gerald Vane, who had been eating a small cake near the doorway, stopped eating. The Duchess of Ashmore stood at the head of the room beside Miss Philippa Rowe, who was beautiful and composed, and had not quite understood yet what she was looking at. Lord Renfrew stood near the supper-room door. He understood immediately. The Duke stopped in the center of the floor. The music had not resumed. Perhaps the musicians understood something too. He addressed Lord Renfrew first. His voice was level and required no volume to carry. Renfrew, present your note to my solicitor, Aldous Fitch, at Fitch & Carr in Chancery Lane. He will settle the matter tomorrow morning. He looked at the man with the steady attention of someone who is waiting to observe whether the other person will make an error. "Miss Barrow's father's debts are no longer your concern." Lord Renfrew said nothing. This was the correct response. The Duke turned toward his mother. Lady Constance Hartwell, Duchess of Ashmore, had managed that room for 30 years. She had never, in all that time, felt the room turn around on her. She felt it now. She was still holding her fan. She did not open it. "You will wish Miss Rowe every happiness this season," the Duke said. "I hope she finds it. She will not find it with me." Miss Rowe's composure held. She was, Cecily thought in the small corner of her mind still capable of observation, a person of genuine dignity. And the recognition that settled in her eyes was not fury, but the particular recalibration that accompanies the discovery of walking confidently in the wrong direction. She dipped her head, once. A graceful, small acknowledgement. She would be all right. The Duchess said very quietly, "Edmund." He looked at her with the patience of a man who has nothing further that can be taken from him. "I know what you arranged," he said. "I know you believed it was sensible." He paused. "You were wrong." She did not reply. Her fan remained folded. Something in her posture shifted. Not collapse, but a measured retreat. The surrender of a position that had been well held and was now simply untenable. A woman near the far wall said something to her companion behind her fan. 3 men near the supper-room door turned to see what the other 3 men near the supper-room door were looking at. A young girl of perhaps 17, making her first season with the expression of someone who is rapidly revising her understanding of how evenings proceed, watched Cecily's face, then watched the Duke's face, then looked down at her program card with something that might have been, in different circumstances, a quiet relief. The Duke turned to Cecily. She was aware of how many people were watching, of the specific quality of the light, of the small resistant shape of the violet beneath her glove, pressed against her knuckle, precisely where her mother had placed it. He said her name. Cecily. He had not said it before, not aloud, not to her. He said it now, in front of the room that had decided she was a companion, and nothing more, in the level, unhurried voice of a man who had chosen his words carefully, and found, in the end, that there was really only one. "Miss Barrow is my intended. The announcement will appear tomorrow." Silence. Then the room, slowly, and then all at once, began to breathe. Lady Harriet said something to Lord Gerald. Lord Gerald nodded in the considered way of a man revising a planned response. Mrs. Covell, who had been told to pay Cecily no mind, paid her very careful mind indeed. The Duchess's fan remained closed. Lord Renfrew found he had somewhere else to be. The Duke offered Cecily his arm. She pressed her thumb against the violet, once, and thought, "Courage, then." She took his arm. She could feel the warmth of him through his coat and through her glove and through the thin muslin of her gown, and she did not look back at the room. And the room watched them go with the particular attention of an audience that has just witnessed something it had not anticipated and will be discussing for a full fortnight. The fire in the drawing-room at Ashmore House burned low and steady on the evening of the last day of March, and outside the snow had finally stopped, and the city had gone quiet in the way it does when the weather has decided something, and the people have given up arguing with it. Cecily sat in the chair nearest the grate. She had chosen it by instinct, not knowing yet which chair she would come to think of as hers, discovering in the choosing that she had already begun to think of chairs as belonging to her in a way she had not permitted herself to think for 2 years. Her gown was not white muslin. It was a warm, deep blue that Lady Harriet had sent around with a note containing no apology, and a great deal of qualified congratulation, and Cecily had accepted both the gown and the note, set the note on the fire, and found the gown was exactly right. The Duke sat across from her. He had been reading. He was not reading now. The book was on the table between them, closed, and beside it he had placed something else, a small oval miniature in a worn gold frame, a young woman with dark eyes, a swaddled child held against her, its face turned into her neck. Cecily looked at it for a long moment. "Her name was Eleanor," he said. "She died on the 4th day of the lying in. The child 3 hours after." He was very still. "James. We had agreed on James." He looked at the miniature. "I was 11 miles away when the messenger came, and I rode, and I was not fast enough. And I have told myself every morning since that had I come earlier, she would have lived. My physician tells me this is not true." He paused. "I have not yet persuaded myself of it." Cecily set down the cup she had been holding. She reached into her left glove, below the knuckle. She removed the pressed violet. It was very small and very flat, and it had lived in that glove long enough to have become a feature of the fabrics inside, a small, soft fixture, as familiar as the seam. She placed it on the table beside the miniature. "My mother gave it to me," she said, "when she was ill, the last spring. She said it was for courage. She said sometimes you only need a small thing to hold on to while you wait for the large things to resolve themselves." He looked at the violet for a long time. Then he picked it up, not with the delicacy of something fragile, but with the care of something real, something that had been used and was still useful. He turned it once between his fingers. "She was right," he said. The fire shifted. Outside, the snow had begun again, soft and windless, laying itself across the city with the quiet patience of something that has nowhere else to be. He set the violet down again, beside Eleanor and James, and the miniature and the small pressed flower sat together in the lamplight. Two kept things that had been carried a long time, now resting. He was looking at her in the firelight, with the expression she had first seen in the antechamber, the one she had not had vocabulary for, and had been accumulating vocabulary since. She thought of 11 minutes in a doorway. She thought of a hand steadied over a footman's tray. She thought of 2 words issued in the center of a ballroom floor, while the musicians held their bows and the room held its breath. "Cecily," he said. It was not a declaration this time. It was not a command. It was a door he had pushed open, and he was letting her know that the door was there, and that there was no hurry, and that he had, in fact, already decided to wait. She said, "Edmund," and the word was strange in her mouth, and entirely correct. He rose from his chair and came to kneel beside hers, and he picked up her hand, the left one, and held it as he had held her in the antechamber, with that same quality of a man who has found what he was carrying and does not intend to put it down. He pressed his thumb once, carefully, across the knuckle where the violet had lived. Outside, the season continued its machinery and its managed certainties, its bills posted, its cards delivered, its verdicts quietly rendered in the language of fans and program cards and names corrected at doorways. Inside, the fire burned. The miniature and the small pressed violet sat side by side on the table between them. 2 things kept against the probability of being lost, now resting together on the same polished surface in a room that was warm. She had come to London with a trunk, a few books, and a small flower for courage, and she had arrived by a road she would not have chosen and could not regret, somewhere she did not need to be invisible in order to be safe. The fire burned. The snow fell. Edmund Hartwell, Duke of Ashmore, held her hand in both of his and looked at her in the way he had looked at the East Gallery doorway, with the patience of a man who has finally stopped measuring what he cannot afford and begun counting what he has. She was home. If Cecily's story found you on a quiet evening, leave a word below, and I will know you were here. Thank you for staying until the end.